There are moments in history when an entire nation holds its breath, when the weight of fear becomes so heavy that it paralyzes not just individuals, but entire communities. This is the story of a confrontation that shook the foundations of belief, challenged the very nature of faith, and revealed something profound about the human spirit when it dares to trust against all odds. This is the story of David and Goliath, and what happened long after that legendary encounter. But to fully understand these battles, we must look back even further to an ancient mystery that has captivated biblical scholars for centuries. Before the great flood of Noah's time, the Bible tells us of something extraordinary and troubling. In Genesis, we read that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful and took them as wives, choosing whomever they pleased. From these unions came offspring of legendary proportion and power. The scriptures call them the Nephilim, the mighty men of old, men of renown. These were not ordinary beings. They were marked by their size, their strength, their ability to dominate. The Bible states that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and had children with them. This phrase has puzzled biblical scholars throughout history. Afterward. What does it mean? Did it mean after the flood? Did it refer to another time altogether? Scripture does not specify. The meaning of this single word has been debated for centuries, as the Bible provides no clear explanation of how or when giants appeared again in human history, nor does it detail any genealogical connection between the ancient Nephilim and the giants that later peoples encountered. What we know from Scripture with certainty is that when the Israelites returned from exploring the land of Canaan, they reported seeing giants there. The Bible refers to different groups of these towering beings, the Anakim, the Rephaim, and others described as descendants of giants. Some theological traditions have pondered possible connections between these later biblical giants and the ancient Nephilim described in Genesis, noting that both are characterized by extraordinary size and power. However, the Bible itself does not make this connection explicit or provide any genealogical evidence linking them. What remains undeniable is that the giants Israel faced were formidable opponents who challenged God's people and demanded unwavering faith to overcome them. Goliath and his relatives were giants of Gath, belonging to the lineage known as the Rephaim. And the Philistines they served carried a reputation steeped in power and dominion that had echoed through the ages. In the ancient lands between the Israelites and the Philistines, military campaigns were not always decided by massive clashes of armies. Sometimes, a single moment determined everything. The Philistines believed that if their champion fell, their entire civilization might follow, and somewhere in the fortified city of Gath, there emerged a figure so imposing that his very presence turned the tide of psychology before any weapon was ever drawn. His name was Goliath, and he was a phenomenon. His stature was legendary, standing nearly 10 feet tall, a measurement so extraordinary that it seems almost impossible to comprehend. His armor was not mere decoration, but a statement of dominance, crafted to strike terror. A bronze helmet covered his head, a coat of scale armor, each plate overlapping like dragon scales, covered his body and weighed more than 100 pounds. Bronze greaves protected his legs. A javelin hung between his shoulders, and the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, thick and sturdy, with a head that weighed 15 pounds. He had trained his entire life for war, and he had never known defeat. A shield bearer walked before him, protecting him further. Morning after morning, Goliath would stand before the Israelites and offer the same challenge, the same taunt, the same dare. For 40 consecutive days he appeared at dawn and again in the evening, calling out to the armies of Israel, mocking their God, demanding that someone come forward to face him in single combat. But day after day, silence answered him. Fear had a voice, and it was louder than any shout. King Saul and his armies trembled. The greatest warriors in Israel stood frozen in their camps, unable to muster the courage to accept Goliath's challenge. The psychological warfare was devastating. Goliath was not just offering combat. He was declaring the absolute superiority of the Philistine gods and the inferiority of Israel's God. Every day that passed without an Israeli champion stepping forward was a spiritual defeat as much as a military one. The men whispered among themselves about Goliath's impossible size, his unstoppable strength, his certainty of victory. Fear spread like a plague through the Israeli camp. Meanwhile, far from the battlefront, in the hills near Bethlehem, a young man named David tended to his family's sheep. He knew nothing of this standoff. His life was simple, his concerns immediate and practical. His greatest battles had been against predators in the darkness, moments when he faced a lion and a bear that threatened his father's flock. In those moments, David discovered something profound about himself. He discovered that when everything seemed impossible, when the odds appeared completely insurmountable, he could call upon a power greater than himself. He did not rely on his own strength alone. He trusted something deeper, an unshakable belief that he was not alone in those struggles, that God stood with him even when fear threatened to overwhelm him. When David's father Jesse sent him to the battlefield to bring supplies to his 3 older brothers who served in King Saul's army, he arrived to discover a nation gripped by terror. He witnessed thousands of trained soldiers, hardened by years of discipline, frozen in their camps. One figure across the valley had accomplished what no enemy army could do. He had made courage itself seem impossible, but something shifted when David arrived. He did not see the same thing everyone else saw. Where others saw an unstoppable force, he saw a target. Where others saw the end of hope, he saw an opportunity for God to demonstrate his power. When David heard Goliath's taunt, when he listened to the giant mock the God of Israel, something burned inside him. He began to speak with the men around him, asking what reward would be given to the man who defeated this Philistine and removed the disgrace from Israel. His brothers grew angry at him, but David pressed forward. He asked to speak with King Saul. And when Saul finally agreed to listen, David spoke with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond himself. He declared that he would meet Goliath's challenge. Saul was shocked. David was barely old enough to be a warrior. He had no armor, no experience in formal battle, no training in the ways of war. But David responded with words that have echoed through centuries. He told Saul about the lion and the bear, about how God had delivered him from their power. He said that the Lord who rescued him from the teeth of predators would rescue him from the hand of Goliath. He declared that this uncircumcised Philistine would fall before the armies of the living God. Saul attempted to dress David in his own armor to give him the traditional weapons of war, but David could not walk in those heavy garments. The armor was not made for him. He did not move in it naturally, so he removed it all. He kept only what belonged to him, what felt right, what he understood. He took his shepherd's staff, his sling, and 5 smooth stones from the stream. These were his weapons, not the weapons of a trained soldier, but the tools of a young man who had spent his life in the fields, protecting sheep, learning to trust in something beyond himself. As David approached Goliath, the giant saw him and began to laugh. This small young man, barely developed, approaching with only a staff and a sling. Goliath cursed David by his gods. He shouted that he would feed David's flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. He was completely confident in his superiority. He had never faced anyone like David, and he had no reason to believe this encounter would be different from his 40 days of unopposed dominance. But David spoke words that revealed the fundamental difference between them. He said that Goliath came with sword and spear and javelin, but David came in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel. He declared that the Lord would deliver Goliath into his hands, that he would strike him down and cut off his head, and that all the earth would know that there was a God in Israel. These were not the words of a confident young warrior. These were the words of someone who understood something that Goliath could never comprehend. That faith backed by conviction creates a power that cannot be measured in conventional terms. David ran toward Goliath. He reached into his pouch, took out a single stone, and placed it in his sling. He released it with all the force and precision he had developed through years of protecting his father's flock. The stone flew through the air and struck Goliath directly in the forehead. The giant fell face forward onto the ground. He was dead before he hit the earth. David then took Goliath's own sword and cut off his head, holding it up as a declaration of Israel's deliverance. When the Philistines saw that their mighty champion was dead, they fled in terror. The Israelites pursued them, and the seemingly impossible victory became complete. But here is where the narrative becomes even more significant. The story of David and Goliath is not an ending. It is a beginning, because the giants did not disappear. New challengers emerged from the Philistine ranks, each carrying the same impossible size, the same destructive power, the same sense of being unstoppable. These were relatives of Goliath, part of the same family of giants from Gath. In the years that followed, David would face not one giant, but multiple opponents from this lineage of giants. If you're watching this right now, understand that your greatest obstacles often do not come in a single form. They return, they evolve, they present themselves again and again in different iterations, testing your commitment to your convictions, challenging whether you will maintain the faith that carried you through the first trial. One of these subsequent giants was Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of the giants from Gath, who came against David years after the first legendary encounter. In this battle, David grew weary. He was older now, and the weight of constant conflict wore on him. Ishbi-Benob's spear was enormous, weighing 300 shekels of bronze, and he intended to kill David. But in that moment when David was weakening, when the giant seemed about to achieve victory, something remarkable happened. Abishai, one of David's mighty men, one of his most loyal warriors, saw the danger and intervened. Abishai struck down Ishbi-Benob and saved David's life. David's men then made a covenant with him. He would no longer go out to battle with them. The lamp of Israel could not be allowed to be extinguished. David had accomplished so much, had led his people through so many victories, that his very survival had become essential to the nation's future. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. If you are watching this, if this message is reaching you right now, I need you to know something important. Subscribe to this channel, because these stories are not historical curiosities about ancient battles. They are blueprints for your own confrontations with the impossible. Your giants may not wear armor or carry spears, but they carry weight. They carry psychological power. They carry the ability to make you believe that victory is impossible. Hit that notification bell so that you never miss a reflection that might be exactly what you need to hear at exactly the moment you need to hear it. Share this with someone who is standing in their own valley right now, frozen by fear, wondering if they have what it takes. They need to know that David did not face his giants alone, and neither do you. The narrative continues with another giant named Lami, who was also a relative of Goliath, from the same lineage of giants. When Elhanan, another of David's mighty men, encountered Lami in battle, he defeated him. The giant fell, not because Elhanan was larger or stronger, but because Elhanan fought with the same conviction that had carried David through his initial encounter with Goliath. He fought knowing that God stood with him. He fought understanding that physical size means nothing against unwavering faith. There was also another giant from the city of Gath, described in the scriptures as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, an unusual physical characteristic that marked him as part of this lineage of giants. When Jonathan, son of Shemaiah and David's brother, faced this giant, he defeated him as well. The pattern was unmistakable and profoundly significant. God's people, armed with faith and conviction, could overcome any opponent, regardless of size, strength, or apparent power. These encounters reveal something essential about the nature of human struggle. The giants did not stop appearing just because David defeated Goliath. In fact, the victory over Goliath seemed to awaken something in David's followers. They had witnessed the impossible become possible. They had watched a young man accomplish what entire armies could not. That memory became a weapon more powerful than any physical defense. When the next giant appeared, David's men did not freeze in fear. They had already seen that faith works. They had already experienced that conviction transcends physical limitations. They had already learned that the size of your opponent is irrelevant when you trust in a power that supersedes any earthly force. The legacy of David's faith did not die with his victory over Goliath. It multiplied. It spread. It gave others the courage to face their own giants with the same unwavering trust. What we discover when we study these ancient confrontations is that they reveal a universal truth about human beings that applies directly to your life right now. We are at our most powerful, not when we rely on external advantages, but when we access internal conviction. We are at our most effective, not when we match our enemy's weapons, but when we trust a power that supersedes weapons entirely. We are at our most transformative when we understand that facing the impossible is not about winning every time, but about refusing to surrender before the battle even begins. The young man who faced the legendary giant did not possess superior strength. He possessed something far more valuable, the absolute knowledge that he stood for something greater than himself. I want you to do something powerful right now. In the comments below, I want you to declare something. Speak a decree that captures your commitment to facing your own giants with the same conviction that David carried into his confrontation. Write this: the size of my giant is irrelevant to the power of my faith. This is not just about words on a screen. This is about claiming your own story, about declaring that you will not be defined by your circumstances or by anyone else's doubts about your capability. Comment that decree below and make it a daily affirmation for yourself. This legacy of faith and courage does not belong to the past. It belongs to you right now, in whatever confrontation is currently defining your life. It belongs to your relationships when they seem too broken to repair. It belongs to your circumstances when they seem too entrenched to change. It belongs to your dreams when everyone around you has declared them impossible. The God who stood with David, who empowered Abishai to save David's life, who gave Elhanan and Jonathan victory over the giants from Gath, that same God stands with you in your confrontations with impossibility. Each person who came after David, each mighty man who faced their own giants, each person who witnessed David's victories and drew strength from them, carried that testimony forward into their own battles. They all became part of something that transcended any single moment. They became part of a collective witness that faith works, that conviction matters, that the impossible is simply the improbable waiting for someone courageous enough to attempt it. Your life can be that same kind of testimony. Your victory over your giants, no matter what form they take, can inspire others to face their own impossible circumstances with renewed courage and deepened faith. As we reflect on what these stories mean, we recognize that each challenge you overcome does not just benefit you. It creates a legacy. It establishes a pattern of faith in your life that others will witness. Your children, your friends, your community will remember not just that you succeeded, but how you succeeded. They will remember that you did not rely on superior resources or unfair advantages. They will remember that you trusted something greater than yourself. And when they face their own giants, they will draw strength from your example. Before you leave this video, I need you to do two important things. First, if this message resonated with you, if you felt something stir in your spirit about facing your own giants the way David and his mighty men faced theirs, please take a moment to like this video. That simple action tells me that these stories matter to you and helps this message reach others who need exactly this kind of encouragement at exactly this moment in their journey. Second, and perhaps even more importantly, come back. Subscribe to this channel because the most powerful giants in your life require not just a single moment of courage, but sustained conviction over time. You are going to need reminders. You are going to need to hear these stories again and again until they become not just intellectual knowledge, but the deep certainty that guides your daily choices and your responses to obstacles. The confrontations between David and his mighty men against Goliath and the giants from Gath were not just about those single moments of combat. They were about what came after. They were about the culture shift that those acts of faith created. They were about the countless people who, having witnessed those victories, drew strength from them and faced their own impossible circumstances with renewed courage. They were about creating a legacy of belief that transcends generations and speaks directly into your current moment. You are not separate from that legacy. You are not too young, too unprepared, too overlooked, too ordinary. Your giants will not be impressed by your credentials or by what others think you should be capable of doing. but they will be overcome by your refusal to surrender to their size. They will be defeated by your connection to something greater than they are. They will find no victory against your conviction that the impossible is not your destiny, but merely your current circumstance. That is the power that was demonstrated when David faced Goliath, when Abishai saved David's life, when David's mighty men defeated giant after giant, echoing the ancient pattern of faith that has sustained God's people since the very beginning. And that power is available to you right now, in whatever form your own giants have taken. Comment that decree one more time before you go. The size of my giant is irrelevant to the power of my faith. Write it, speak it, live it. The God of David is the God of your life too. The conviction that moved that young shepherd boy to face an impossible giant is the same conviction that can move you. The power that sustained David's mighty men through encounter after encounter with the giants of Gath is the power that sustains you. The only question that remains is what you will choose to believe about yourself and about the God who stands with you in every battle you will ever face.